In any life, we have highs and lows, light and dark, wins and losses. What happens when we encounter that moment in time when what happens next could change everything? Join us as we step into another person's inspirational moment and see how we can connect their experience to ours. This is Greg Stevens, and you're listening to A Shot of Inspiration. Hi, I'm Greg Stevens, and welcome to another episode of A Shot of Inspiration. It's been quite a while since I did my last interview. I think it was back in November with Dr. Jennings. Maybe there was one after that. I went on vacation, ended up having a back injury, having surgery, getting back into things now. So I'm really happy to get started again. And today's guest, I'm really excited to have a friend of mine named Kyle Hughes. He sent me an email, said, you really need to talk to this guy. And we were going to talk a little about business. And he gave me Jay's name and we just connected. And all of a sudden I was like, this is a great story. I think it should be on A Shot of Inspiration. So Jay's a new friend, folks. This is Jay Singh, and Jay has a coaching initiative where he focuses on fathers. And it's so interesting because in our world today, fathers aren't really lifted up. We're the stooges, or we're portrayed in many different ways throughout life. And the father doesn't hold the weight it used to. And it's a really thankless piece. And there's a lot of people out there who aren't really fathers that have created that for us. But there are a lot of men out there that are struggling to do the right thing with their families, that really want to be that person that their family can count on, that the pressures that they have that are unseen. And I think there's something internally with men that we typically don't talk about. Women have a great ability to experience all the different emotions and things like that. And many of the thoughts are changing, but we still have a ways to go, folks. We really do. And that's what I love about what we're doing in the world. We can actually expand how we see the world. We can expand different views. And that's what I wanted to bring Jay on to talk about his work with fathers, how he got here, and the difference he's making for people. So, Jay, thanks for being on the show today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Greg. Really excited about being here.
Let's dive into your life. Tell people a little about who you are, where you came from, and the journey that brought you to what you're doing today. So let's start back, maybe even as far as you being a little kid. What was your experience like as being a child in your family with your father? What kind of things imprinted you, or things you really desired that you want to move forward with? Sorry, that's 3 questions in a row there, but I just want to get your background a little.
Sure. No, thanks for asking. So right now I'm a father of two. I'm married, got a 7-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. My own childhood started in Chicago. My father moved to the US from India. So I'm half Indian, was raised by him and my mother. My dad, I think, did a lot of work to change the way he showed up as a father relative to the experience he had growing up. He was sent to boarding school at a really young age. And so he had fairly complete separation from his parents very prematurely for a young boy. And I think that certainly influenced how he wanted to show up. So my dad was very present. He was a consultant. He never took on traveling jobs, as an example. He was pretty much always at home. And my father was also, he was very physically affectionate for a man, I think, at that point in our culture. I got a lot of my, I would say, just needs for affection and play met predominantly through my dad, whether it's roughhousing or it's just literally cuddling with him on the couch when I was a young kid. And so that was something that, I think inspired in a lot of ways how I show up with my own children in terms of being very physically present in their lives and engaged with them very physically and being emotionally available. And then there were pieces of my upbringing that I wanted to do different than my father. My dad, I think, had a lot of tendency to bottle up his emotionality and try and hold it back for desire to not mess up the vibes at the dinner table or unload on anybody. But at some point, he would end up cracking. And I remember the whole buildup process being acutely aware of the energy that he was, trying to contain within himself, the mounting anger and the
Yep.
fear that would just surge through my body.
It doesn't happen just all at once. It builds,
No,
doesn't it?
Absolutely. And so as a kid, I was terrified of his emotionality. I was terrified of his anger and when he would pop and when he'd eventually let those feelings out. It had this, challenge for me where my dad was in many ways like my predominant like source of affection and embodied love as I got into my like earlier to like middle childhood years. And he was also like the person I was most afraid of. And so there was that. And so there was things that, and this is not to speak poorly of my parents. I think given their childhoods, they did a phenomenal job of moving the needle on intergenerational trauma and things like that. But I think any single human being who is growing up with human parents these days is going to undergo some amount of negative conditioning and trauma, whether you call it trauma with a uppercase or a lowercase t. There's going to be things that and I see it myself already. And as a father, it was hard for me to acknowledge, wow, I'm already imprinting my kids in negative ways that I wish I weren't. There's my own edges and limitations as a father, my own tendency to, I think I had the strong desire as a father to show up differently than my dad and not bottle up all my feelings till I blew up. But enter the pressure cooker of fatherhood and the sleep deprivation and the emotional strains on my marriage with my wife and, all the demands of parenting. And there I found myself, realizing the apple had not rolled as far from the tree as I cared to.
Yeah.
And it was a very humbling experience. And there was a tendency for me to just sit there and beat on myself for like, why am I repeating the same stuff? I know that this is, this was damaging for me. Why would I want to do, why am I doing the same thing? And I think for me, a big reconciling point with the journey of fatherhood is recognizing that we have to enter the messy fray. We have to make the mistakes. And it's only at the point that we make the mistakes can we then choose a different outcome. I think for me, I had this lofty goal of, oh, I'm going to just show up as this really conscious father. And now I see that that's a load of BS in the sense that it's impossible to just arrive there without having done the work, made the mistakes, and then over and over again, make the small and incremental changes in terms of how I show up. And so that I don't make the same mistake maybe as badly.
Right.
I change how I'm showing up. And from that point, shift the narrative. For me, fatherhood completely humbled me. I was just shocked, and it was amazing in many ways. So don't get that wrong. Like fatherhood has been probably one of the most profound blessings in my life, hands down, in terms of the opportunity to have these two little bright lights in my life. And it is also the whole context of fatherhood, all of the demands that I think are on today's fathers in terms of being a provider and being a very emotionally and physically engaged person in the home. And I do a lot with my kids in terms of taking care of them. And,
Can I
what,
ask real quick, how
yeah.
is fatherhood different than you imagined it to be for you?
I think the biggest thing is just the messiness factor. You, as a kid, you don't realize that your parents are just, they don't have a manual for how to do this. They haven't done this before. And you think that your parents know what they're doing. And then you enter fatherhood. And I think for the early couple of years, fatherhood felt simple and it felt like it was in some ways easy for me to know what to do with an infant and how to take care of them, how to love on them, all those kinds of things. Then add all the emotional complexity of a kid who's my daughter's very emotionally volatile. She has huge feelings. She has a tendency to get very dysregulated very easily. And so what I wasn't expecting was like, wow, how much my own buttons would get pushed every day over and over again and in different forms, and that my kids would know where they could apply pressure to then get a reaction, right? Like our kids are little scientists in many ways, experimenting with what happens when I do this. And so I didn't appreciate how much all the practices, let's say I'd done before that, were
Right.
going to get completely put to the test with the real life experience of fatherhood. How am I going to deal with my big feelings? How am I going to deal with not getting my own needs met at chunks of time? Those
Well,
kinds of
and that's such an evolved idea, and a lot of people don't think that way. What would you tell someone? Why should they take the time to really look at this? What does it really matter? The kids are going to grow up however they're going to grow up. I didn't have it good. My kids have it better. We put a low bar out there for ourselves sometimes, and sometimes other people put a high bar. But what do you think a realistic bar is?
So I think I'm going to answer, I think, the first part of your question before
Okay.
I get back to the realistic bar, because that's not an easy one to answer.
It's not.
Um, I would say that why apply ourselves more, right? Why try to move the needle more in fatherhood? And I would say on a selfish level, I mean, so the one thing is that, of course, we want to do our best so that our kids can go out and live the greatest expression of who they are on this planet, right? And the less crappy stuff or the mistakes that we keep repeating over and over again that we don't have to keep repeating over and over again, the more you know, I guess, unfettered by our crap that they're going to be when they go out in the world. The less wounded they'll be, the less traumas they'll have, the less things they'll have to work through and get over. Now, those same things can also be their gifts, right? In many ways, that the things that I have from my parents that I wish were different in some ways have also become the greatest sources of my own growth and my own learning, and then ultimately my own gift to other men and the work that I do. So part of it is just it's for the sake of our children, obviously. Then the second piece I would say on the selfish level is it's for yourself as a man. If in the audience, if you are a father, you're contemplating fatherhood, and I think this applies to women as well through motherhood, that the more we square up to the intensity of fatherhood or parenthood, and we truly meet all of that intensity head on, the more we open ourselves to the tremendous opportunity for growth that it provides us with. Because every single day in my household, there is some opportunity for me to show up differently and to do work on myself in the face of the various forms of intensity that fatherhood will take on, whether it's sleep deprivation and choosing to show up with more patience and more presence, or it's learning how to be more emotionally honest and real about where I'm at and what I'm feeling, whether it's with my wife or with my children, or it's learning how to not get hijacked by my old pattern reaction to, oh my gosh, this is someone getting really angry and dysregulated, reminding me of my father, my childhood home, before it would feel like it wasn't safe in my household when the volcano was getting ready to blow. Now my daughter is, or my wife might be getting worked up, and that's triggering that same patterning inside of me. So can I do the work on a daily basis or weekly basis, whatever it might be, of having those triggering moments and then choosing to show up differently over and over again and move the needle on my own patterned ways of showing up in the world that hijack me in many other places, like whether it's with, let's say, a male authority figure that again reminds me of that energetic, and it takes over my nervous system, and immediately I go from being in my upstairs brain, my rational brain, to dropping into my reptilian brain. And so for me, fatherhood has helped me go, frankly, from being a boy in a man's body to becoming an actual man,
Yeah.
in terms of squaring up over and over again to the level of responsibility and also the personal growth that fatherhood offers us. For me, fatherhood is this crucible that has melted me down over and over again. And it's uncomfortable and I don't like it a lot of times. And in the midst of it, it is messy. It's gross,
Yeah.
And then I get forged into something stronger. And I'm so much happier with who I am and where I am today than I was before becoming a dad.
Yeah, you don't have the shame of doing your worst rather than the joy of doing your best when those things should happen. The moment we need to exercise that muscle is the moment we don't want to. It goes
I couldn't
against
agree more. Yeah,
it,
couldn't
it,
agree more.
and it's frustrating. It seems like it's never going to end. I got to keep doing this. I got to keep doing this. That's life, isn't it? It's what's the next thing? It's interesting because my mom brought up a point one time. She said, when we grew up, when my mom raised me, she said our focus was not on you children. She said it was on what our purpose was in the world, prepare you to go out into the world and do this. Things have shifted over the last 40 years because people now focus on their children. They have all kinds of sporting events. The focus is on their enjoyment, letting them have the best childhood, all the different things. And then many times they don't get them prepared how to deal with the new world. And I think there's benefits and drawbacks of both. What do you see?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one we could probably spend 3 podcasts trying to untangle and answer. But I think there's an increased appreciation for kids to get to, and desire for kids to get to just enjoy their childhood. That's certainly something that's on there. I think for me, one of the bigger things too is just recognizing that in terms of just doing my own inner work and the work that my wife is doing, and many folks that I work with professionally and just in friends, is there's a desire to impart in our kids a greater sense of willingness to do like harder inner work of being more reflective of themselves, and to ultimately give our children the toolbox and the skill sets to be able to go out and thrive, not just in terms of a kind of quote unquote linear professional career of some sort, but to show up as the greatest human beings that they can be. That's deeply needed. And I look at my two children and I firmly believe, I don't know what they're going to do in the world, but I feel like they are both here to be change makers in profound ways in terms of the state of human consciousness. There is so much light and love that flows through them that I don't know how it's going to get applied or what it's going to look like, but in order for them to just be able to go out and live that fully. And it's something I struggle with as a parent, is this, how do I get out of their way as best
Yeah.
as possible in terms of letting them do that? And I think learning how to give our children all the enriching opportunities that we can without overscheduling them, without just having them essentially lose themselves in the path to becoming a highly functioning young adult. Where is that sweet spot of giving them challenges and things like that, and plenty of skills and activities, and then also giving them a chance to just be themselves and experience themselves, and to not lose connection with their innermost true essence, right? That I think many of us that are doing work in the world have taken a long time to come back to ultimately give our greatest gifts.
Oh, yeah. Each time you've said something, it's you go work on yourself. You go work on yourself. I believe that your kids are going to see what you do, not what you tell them. And one of the things I've experienced with you, Jay, is in our time together, you do take that personal responsibility. It's interesting because even a moment ago, I was one of those kids. I would have loved to have had sports all the time because I did it anyway. But even those things challenged me in ways. Life is out there, but so often we focus on the activity rather than the relationship. What is it? What is it teaching us? Do we spend the time coming back from that difficult game and talking about the real things of life rather than just how many points did you score, or looking at those things, but creating that relationship through it? And that's what I look at. The benefits are just amazing that we have today, but there's drawbacks if we don't take a look and see where we are and be grateful for how things have changed, the abilities we have to do things differently today.
Mm-hmm.
And I love also when we started talking, you said you wanted to be able to talk to fathers as kind of a door of opening, because I feel like that's where most men will probably be their most vulnerable, because it is for their kids. They do that sacrifice every day. I'm trying to do these things, and mothers do too. And just in the aspect of fathers, though, it's not seen as sometimes powerful to go and engage with that conversation. I see the opposite. I see there's huge courage there. And when you really start to break that down, that's the thing that most people fear. I fear that. I have to step into that. What is your experience as a father and some of the people you've worked with is bringing through the process you bring them through in coaching?
For me, when I became a dad, I was caught off guard by the intensity of all of it put together, right? And so it was the sleep deprivation, the strain, and the changes to my relationship with my wife, the huge shift of going from ultimately putting myself first. Even though I was married, it wasn't like I had to take care of my wife and she needed help meeting her needs. We're both completely functional on our own, but we're in this relationship. And then going to not only needing to put her first, the baby first, but also putting her first, because she's ultimately caring for the baby in such a profound way, plus so many other forms of challenge and change that all come up. And so there's all this intensity, and I found myself just getting worked. And I was in this pressure cooker. The level of it was just an order of magnitude beyond any kind of other challenge I had encountered in my life at that point. And yet I didn't know who to talk to at first. I didn't really have other close friends who were in a similar phase of parenthood in terms of where they were. And so there was, I felt like I was alone. And I think a lot of men are living out the story of the lone wolf, or this myth of the lone wolf, that they've got to muscle through it themselves. They got to just keep their heads down and grind it out. And so there's this tendency to just bottle up all of the challenge and not process it, not share it, not be heard. And then I think a lot of men also struggle with feeling that it's a sign of weakness to admit that they're having a hard time. That we shouldn't be vulnerable. We shouldn't be authentic about all of those hardships. And so a lot of men, and myself included, just in the early chapters of fatherhood, are many times just roughing it through this wilderness on their own. And they might be able to keep it together on the outside, but I'm sure that they're having their moments of blowing up behind closed doors, and that they feel this, that they've lost a part of themselves in that journey. And I think a lot of men, especially if they don't do some form of work with other men, of getting honest and vulnerable about what's going on, they then start to feel like they're no longer living a life for themselves. And they believe in this story that to be a good dad, I've got to go and provide, I've got to go make money, do a great job with my work. Then I got to come home and be as, physically and emotionally present with my family as possible. And maybe other things that I care about or I yearn to do, if I go pursue those things, I'm being selfish. I'm doing that for me, and it's taking away from my time with my kids. My wife needs a break or whatever it might be. And for me, I really struggled with this feeling of guilt about asking for time to go do things on my own that were important to me. And at the same time, I was growing this greater sense of resentment over and over towards my wife and kids about, hey, there's these things I also care about that I haven't been able to do in years. And when is that going to happen? The medicine for me in a lot of ways was going and sitting in circle with other men who were fathers who were going through that same journey, and just simply hearing what they were going through, even though it was different, but it had similarities to my experience, and getting to be heard. And then in other forms of men's work, getting challenged, having men question, like, what assumptions do you have about your life that aren't true? The idea that the best form of me as a father is one who just works, and then is there physically at home all the time. And so, like, my kids ultimately yearn for me to live a life that feels deeply meaningful and impactful, and that I'm living a life of service to some greater cause that has me lit up, and I bring that energy back home, as opposed to feeling quietly resentful towards my kids. My kids don't want that. They want the fullest me. But in my head, I hadn't challenged that assumption. Having other men who can either gently or sometimes very sharply call you out on things like that and challenge you to be your best self. There's such profound opportunity when we start to get real about what's going on. We don't just talk about the surface level challenges and complain about it in terms of fatherhood and the loss of freedom, but instead we go very deep and vulnerable about, hey, I'm having a really hard time with this dynamic in my marriage because we don't have time any longer. My daughter is driving me nuts half the days after school, whatever it might be, and actually just like what's real for me. And so getting men to open up and do that work, sometimes they're comfortable with it. Other times it's the first time they've done anything like that, especially with other men. A lot of times men are more comfortable opening up emotionally with a woman in their lives as opposed to a male friend.
Yeah.
In some ways, it can be helpful to sit with another group of men that you don't know socially, so that there's a sense of, this is anonymous. I can share what's going on, and it's not going to come back to me at the soccer game this weekend or at the pool or whatever it might be. So
Well, when you said that, my friend Matt Jones, we have a group of guys that he started a Thursday night. He calls it Thursday night council. Sometimes we get around a fire. Sometimes we go to a big bar. Sometimes we go to someone's place, play cards. But it's a group of guys that really would never run into each other anywhere. And it's interesting because I've had some of the wives that I've met tell me, oh, I love it when my husband goes to Thursday night council because he just comes back re-energized. It's different. I think women need it. I think men need it. I think teenagers need it. Everyone needs to be able to get off with your group to be able to process and do things. But most people don't get on a deeper level. They keep it at a surface level. What if your group got together and went really deep? And that's what I love what it sounds like, because you talk about the real things, and there doesn't have to be, the sharing is just the therapy sometimes. Just being able to get
absolutely.
it out.
Absolutely.
Right. And
Yeah.
then understanding that other people have the same struggles. Some people have way beyond yours. And then there's the, thank goodness I don't have those problems, Greg.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me ask you, how would someone find you? What's the work you're doing? I know we're going to post some stuff on social media for you, but I'd like you to just throw it out there.
Often the types of men that will work with me are fathers, and they feel like there's something missing, whether it's a sense of underlying and fundamental purpose in their life that feels deeply enriching, that like they are giving their greatest gifts out in the world and doing something that feels more meaningful than just making money and being a provider. A lot of men, they just double down on whatever it is that they're doing when they go into fatherhood, and then they lose track of, oh, maybe there was some other project I was working on or some other skill I was developing or some direction I wanted to head, but then they let go of that in the face of fatherhood and all of its demands. So it's men who want to reconnect with that sense of purpose is often a driver. Other times it's men that want to deepen their relationship with themselves. They want to work on that relationship with themselves. A lot of times, you know, as boys, we're taught to emotionally dissociate from, especially our negative emotionality. We're taught that, you know, don't be angry, don't be jealous, don't cry, don't be afraid. So there's all these negative emotional states that we're taught when we're young, and not with any malicious intent, obviously, on the part of caregivers and parents and teachers and those kinds of things. But we're taught to no longer even to express it. And for many of us, we stop even tracking that we're in those negative emotional states. And that carries forward into adulthood. And so many men are emotionally numb. They don't recognize where they're at. And when we can't recognize what we're feeling, we also can hardly recognize what we need or what matters to us. We've lost the compass that getting that real time feedback from life about this makes me feel good and this doesn't feel good in terms of a social situation or work that I want to be doing. And so men who want to come to life again and feel all that life has to offer, both the highs and the lows, and they want to reclaim that compass, and they want to take better care of themselves, whether it's physically, like exercising and eating better, or it's just being a better friend of themselves, having more time to themselves for things like solitude, going out with other men to actually have real and authentic dialogue. So that relationship with self is a big piece. And then the third thing is men that want to just deepen how they show up as fathers or husbands and partners.
Yeah.
That they want to do work on themselves. They want to have tools to be able to show up differently. They want to be able to navigate conflict better. They want to be able to learn how to be better listeners so that their wives stop saying, you don't listen to me, or you're not paying attention, or you're not hearing me. There's this so often, especially in the context of parenthood, that like partners just stop feeling heard by the other one. And so working on any of those areas, those are all jumping in points for the men that I work with. So hopefully that answers your question there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it answers all of it. One other question is, do you do this one-on-one? Do you do this in groups? Do you do a mixture of both? How do you go about this?
So I do both things. For men that are interested, I've got a 10-week online program that I run, and that is specifically is for men to work on those three different areas: relationship with ourselves, relationship with our sense of purpose and taking action on it or clarifying it, and then deepening how we show up in marriage and fatherhood,
Right.
and working or getting more tools for how we show up there.
Yeah.
So for men that are interested, that group program container is extremely powerful because you're going to go on a journey with other men. You probably won't know anyone in the group when you get started, and you'll leave that experience with this profound group of brothers that you've had this very authentic and real journey in those different areas of life. And through that 10-week container, every week I give the men new or changed daily practices that they're meant to implement in their lives. And then they're held accountable to do that. And they've got a post online in a little private community we've got that, hey, I did this practice and maybe this is what came up from it. And it's a very structured program that gives men, I think, a great way to dive in and go deeper. The program is called The New King, and a lot of it is around us inhabiting our own inner king. There's the concept of masculine archetypes that your listeners may or may not have heard of. One of them is the king. There's also the warrior. There's the magician, the lover. There's this seminal Moore and Gillette book about the masculine archetypes. But the king archetype, I think, is one of the ones that we as a culture these days, we don't really teach people to want to step into their kinghood, their inner sense of kingship any longer. In the context of fatherhood, being that leader all the time, you can just insert leader instead of king if you don't like that kind of anachronistic term. But showing up as a leader and just like wearing that mantle of responsibility all of the time. It doesn't go away. It's not a sexy archetype to inhabit. The warrior is, I think, very culturally sought after, right? In so many movies, it's the warrior that is the hero. It's the warrior that goes and kicks ass places and brings back whatever form of goodness or whatever rewards that might be there. A lot of times, stepping into that enduring and intense and challenging role of leadership, we see a lot of toxic examples of leadership, especially masculine leadership in our culture these days. And so a lot of this work is for men to step and reclaim their own sense of true, authentic, heart-centered power in the context of their lives with fatherhood and things like that. So I do one-on-one coaching as well with men, and that can be for a man that it doesn't work, the timing of doing a program like that, the 10-week program, or he just wants to go really deep in a certain area of his life, or it might be that there's one facet that he really wants to drill down in. A lot of times men will come out of that 10-week program and they might want some one-on-one coaching as well, where they recognize like, oh, I want to work on this part of my life and go deeper with this. So both are certainly places where men can start.
Jay, thank you so much. I love the work you're doing. I love that it's out there. I want to make sure listeners, if you get a chance and you're a father and you would like to work with Jay, please reach out to him. Let him know you heard about him on our podcast. Also, folks, something a lot of people ask, what do you do? What do you do? Well, what do? I actually teach people how to go have those difficult conversations. I work with a lot of different coaches and therapists, but my goal is to teach people how. People will say you need to go have that conversation because we give the ideas and all of that, but it's a skill set of how to have them. Because as a father, you need to understand that you need to challenge yourself. You need a place to do all those things. And then you got to pick on the warrior thing like you were talking about. That's the brave thing you got to do. You got to go have the conversation with your spouse or someone at work or your kid in a way that's actually going to build the relationship even through some of the most difficult times. So that's the work I do. So it's good to be doing that type of work with you, Jay. And hopefully we can work together in the future and help people that hear this episode. So thank you for being on today. And folks, thanks for being a part again of A Shot of Inspiration. If you'd like and subscribe, that would possibly help us out. I wish you the best. I'll see you next time on A Shot of Inspiration. Bye-bye. Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks for listening to this episode of A Shot of Inspiration. If you like this or any of our other episodes, make sure you rate it and share it with a friend. This is Greg Stevens, and we look forward to being with you next time. Until then, be bold, be courageous, and respectfully speak your truth.